Today we are going to be doing a brief overview of the United States as it stood around 1812. And the idea here is that you are going to get kind of the big picture of where the United States was around this time period, how it fit into the rest of the world, how it was growing as a country, and the different parts of the country and how they differed from one another. Here are a number of questions for you guys. The idea is that by the end of the video you should be able to answer all of these. I would suggest that you write these questions down, and as you watch the rest of the video, see if you can answer them based on the stuff that I tell you. Alright, so let's get started by looking at American geography and basically where the United States stood in relation to the rest of the world. So this big continent right in front of us, that's North America. To the right of that, that is to the east, there is the Atlantic Ocean. And then you have Europe up there in the top right corner. So the first thing you'll probably notice about this is that North America is really far away from Europe. And this means that even though the European nations of Great Britain and France are really powerful and very well developed, America doesn't have to worry about them too much because they're so far away. It takes at least a month for somebody to go from Great Britain to the United States. So that means that it's pretty hard for Great Britain to boss the United States around. Furthermore, the United States is the strongest country in North America. So you see the blue there is the United States. To the north of the United States, you have Canada. And Canada looks really big and powerful, and it's controlled by Great Britain. But really, most of Canada is kind of like really cold and a bunch of forests and really not that many people. So Canada is not a very powerful political entity. It's mostly undeveloped. To the south of the United States, you have Florida and Mexico. And Mexico for a while is controlled by Spain, as is Florida. These areas are also not very well developed. It's still mostly wilderness with a few outposts. That's very different from the United States, which is full of growing cities and ever-increasing trade and growing population. So the United States is the strongest person in its neighborhood. The only people that are stronger than it are all the way across the Atlantic Ocean in Europe. That is Great Britain and France. So Canada doesn't really like the United States and vice versa because the United States just fought a war with Britain and Canada belongs to Britain, so there's some tension there. And also, the United States thinks that it's supposed to continue expanding westward. That means that they believe that a lot of the land that belongs to Mexico should belong to the United States. So this leads the United States to kind of stay on bad terms with both Canada and Mexico, and will ultimately result in war both with Great Britain, who owns Canada, and with Mexico. We'll talk about that much later in the course. Another really important thing is that Great Britain and France over in Europe are still fighting a war with each other. They've basically been fighting on and off for 50 years at this point. And they want to weaken each other in any way possible. One way they want to do this is they want to make sure that the other one cannot trade with the United States. The United States can ship all sorts of good stuff over to Great Britain and France that both sides really want. This is stuff like food, stuff like lumber, stuff like mineral resources like iron, but also fancy luxury products like cotton and tobacco and sugar. And so this sets up a conflict of interest. The United States wants to send stuff over to Europe, but each of the European powers, both Great Britain and France, are trying to block U.S. trade with one another. And this is really important, and it will eventually lead to the War of 1812. So that's a little picture of where the United States stands internationally. Okay, so now we've got here a physical map of the United States, or at least what will become the United States. And the main thing I want you to see here is how the landscape of America relates to trade in America. The first and most important thing you need to understand is that trade is the life of the country. Without trade, the United States would not exist. Basically, everybody has a job in the United States, and almost everybody's job comes from trading with Europe or with other countries, somehow. For example, if you're a farmer, you grow food, right? But once that food is grown, you sell it, and maybe you sell it to a trader. And the trader will take all the food you've grown, and they'll try and trade it to somebody else. And usually this somebody else is going to be somebody from another country. Because America produces so much stuff, it has so much land, but it doesn't really have that many people. So a lot of what it's producing is getting shipped off across the ocean to Europe in exchange for cash and other good stuff. So if you want to trade, what is the best place for you to be? The answer is either close to the ocean or close to a river. And so you can see the major cities of the United States, New Orleans, Charleston, New York, and Boston, are all right on the coast. And the reason for this is that they are all trading centers. Basically, stuff from around those cities is brought there, and then from there, huge boats are shipping all of this stuff across the ocean to other countries. And then those countries are shipping back other good stuff that America wants, like clothes and guns and shoes and clocks and other stuff. So the most important river in the American economy is the Mississippi River, which is outlined in that blue squiggle there. And so basically, how it works is if you lived on the East Coast, you would just ship your stuff to the Atlantic Ocean, and that stuff would get carried away. But if you lived in the interior of the country, next to the Mississippi River, instead of shipping stuff directly to the ocean, you would ship stuff to the river, and boats would carry stuff down the river, and it would get to the city of New Orleans, and from there it would be loaded onto a huge boat and carried out into the Atlantic Ocean. And so almost everybody's life, even if you're a simple farmer, is connected to trade with the outside world. One more thing to note here is that mountains block trade, and therefore are not places where you want to live. So most people in America live near rivers or near the coast. And mountains, like the Appalachian Mountains in the east and the Rocky Mountains in the west, serve as barriers to expansion because you can't trade, and if you can't trade, you can't have a job. All right, so there you go. Basically, trade is important, and the rivers, especially the Mississippi River, are important for trade. And last of all, I want us to get an idea of the different regions in America. And this map is from 1821, but basically what it says is true for earlier in 1812 and also for later on also. So there are three main regions: the North, the South, and the West. So let's start with the North. So the North, which is represented by the kind of bright blue states at the top of the map, has no slavery. And basically, this is extremely important and makes it very different from the South. So they don't really do a whole lot of farming in the North. Their economy is based mostly on trading and manufacturing. They build ships, they have big ports, and they make good stuff, which they can then sell to other people. You start to see big factories popping up in places like Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. The South, and one last thing is the blue states are growing very quickly. They're getting a lot of immigrants who are coming over across the ocean from Europe, and they are also sending a lot of people out west. So most of the people moving into the western territories, especially Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, come from the northern states. So then you've got the South, and the South are represented by the red states. And in the South, there are a huge number of slaves. They make up more than 1/3 of the population down there. And here the economy is based almost 100% on plantations. And these plantations produce cash crops. That is stuff that's not really meant to be consumed, but rather stuff that's meant to be sold on the market. And the main one here is cotton. So cotton is being produced in huge quantities and then being shipped away mostly to England, where the English will buy it and in exchange send other stuff back to the South or to the rest of the country. And one other thing about the South is it's very slow growing. Basically, it hasn't changed very much since before independence. There are still just huge farms producing stuff agriculturally, and it's not changing or growing very quickly. This is important because as time goes on, as the North grows and the South does not grow, the North becomes more and more powerful compared to the South. And last of all, you have the West. And so the West is everything to the left of that black squiggly line that I drew on the map. And so the West is composed both of slave states in the South and non-slave states in the North. So as America expands west, there's kind of this line that divides places where there are and where there are not slavery. And so that's a big difference. But there are some things that all the Western states have in common. First of all is that there are lots of Native Americans living in this part of the continent still. And as more and more white people come over and start kicking them out, the Native Americans will sometimes fight back because they see that this is their homeland and they know what happened to Native Americans further east. So they're willing to fight to try and control their country. Of course, they lose this battle over time, but for a while, there are more Native Americans here than there are people from the United States. Most everybody in the West is a farmer. In the North, it's small farmers who own their own land and grow food. And in the South, it's big plantations which are spreading west as slavery spreads west. And basically everybody in the West is dependent on the Mississippi. If you live west of that black line, you probably ship whatever you grow to the Mississippi, and all of that stuff goes south to New Orleans and then is traded with the rest of the world. And that is, if you don't have access to the Mississippi River, then you don't get to trade, and if you don't have any trade, then you don't have any money, and if you don't have any money, then you can't live. So everybody depends, more or less, on the Mississippi River. It's super important. Here are a number of questions for you guys. The idea is that by the end of the video, you should be able to answer all of these. I would suggest that you write these questions down, and as you watch the rest of the video, see if you can answer them based on the stuff that I tell you.